So if anyone knows that poem, The Traveler, I think you know that it's one of the most powerful poems. It's one of the most powerful moments of illumination and consciousness, alluding to the idea that we do not begin with birth and we do not end with death, that we are beyond all of that. And it also alludes to the idea that there is something that stays with us, that we have consciousness, right? That wherever we are in physical form or in spiritual form, we are born with consciousness, no? So if we are born with consciousness and we are not actually born into life when we have life in the physical form, but we were born before that in the mind of God in a great idea, and we do not end at death just because the physical body makes its transition, that doesn't mean that the spirit is gone. Whenever I'm working with children, I use the idea to talk about death. I propose the idea that when you're little, when you're very little and mom leaves the room or dad leaves the room, children think that they're gone, right? If they leave the room, they don't exist, and they come back and they exist. But the more they go through their childhood, they recognize that just because mom or dad has walked out of the room, that doesn't mean they don't exist anymore, right? And that analogy helps us to recognize that we can even take on our practice in and of ourselves about life and what life is. That life is, in fact, consciousness. So if life is consciousness, then what is ours to do? What is ours to do? A lot of times we have, I think, an illusionary concept that when we pass or when we make our transition, that all the aspects of life that needed to be worked on will just be done, all the way gone, right? But what can we do here? If life does not begin at birth and end at death, and we have consciousness throughout this process of experiencing our soul's being, is there something we can do here in this moment? I believe there is. In every moment, there is something we can do to learn our consciousness. And I believe that that learning stays with us. I believe that that is the learning that is alluded to by the master teachers. So, we are getting ready to embark on a journey. We do an Adventures in Spirituality program every fall. And this year, it is based on the book by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. It's this book. You can get it in the bookstore if you haven't gotten it yet and you want to work along with us. You can also pick up a study guide online. You can download it if you want to do this as an independent study. But if you want to jump into a small group, we take this time to go deeper. And we meet at people's homes, and once a week for this 6-week program, we dive into our consciousness together, and we create safe space to have these sacred circles and to share in consciousness and look at our mindfulness practice. Today I'm going to share with you a couple of stories. The first one is this. There was an introduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park. And before this introduction of the wolves again, the wolves were pretty much extinct from the park. And in 1995, the naturalists reintroduced these wolves. And a pretty amazing thing happened. I'll post it online later if you're on Facebook and you want to check in. But a pretty amazing thing happened. They introduced just a few wolves, and Yellowstone Park, which had started kind of degrading to somewhat, to some degree. Because there weren't wolves, right, the deer population grew and grew and grew, and humans tried to come in and modify that and shift it and take care of the issues. But when the ecosystem is disrupted, right, then a lot of other things can ensue. And so not only were there too many deer, but then there was also too much eating of the vegetation, so the land was seriously affected. And then when you have the vegetation affected, you have the banks of the waterways affected because you have erosion, etc. So anyway, a group of naturalists introduced wolves back into that environment. And then they watched. And the simple act of introducing the wolf into the environment shifted the entire ecosystem, shifted everything, even the rivers. Because what began to happen was that the deer, one, had a natural predator, but not only that, the deer started inhabiting the areas that were a little more secluded, that were a little more safe rather than eating on the same vegetation until it was gone. So the vegetation started coming back. So long story short, the trees started growing taller, more birds came to the trees. When birds came, their predators and their co-inhabitants came, and so the entire ecosystem shifted, and it began to thrive. It began to flourish. All because of the introduction of one animal that was key to the balance of this ecosystem. Mindfulness, pure awareness is like the wolf. It is the wolf that can be lacking from our mental and spiritual environment, but if introduced, a dynamic shift in the entire environment takes place. Changes that one wouldn't even imagine begin to occur because that one element, mindfulness, was introduced into this body-being system. Amazing, right? So, this adventure in spirituality is very focused on mindfulness. It's very focused on the idea that if we are present to our awareness, if we are present to, does anyone realize that they have voices in their heads? I one time said to my dad, I said something about, well, part of me this and part of me that and this and that. And he's a statistics professor, and not that he's, I was going to say like pretty normal, but that's silly to say, but pretty normal. And he looked at me and he said, there's only one of you, Erin. You know that, right? I was like, I know. I had just gotten out of a family systems workshop. And in the concept of family systems workshops, they have you look at the different aspects of your mind and your consciousness and the different voices that come along in your mind. Because you've noticed, right, that you've had conversations with yourself, right? And then you've noticed maybe that who is the self I'm having a conversation with and who is the one witnessing the whole conversation? If you're not following me, jump into this book and you'll be on the roller coaster. And it is a bit of a roller coaster, but it's a roller coaster of thoughtfulness. It's like introducing the wolf into the environment. Because once one becomes mindful of the conversations in their consciousness and their awareness, one can stop reacting and acting from these conversations that sometimes drag us off our path, sometimes have little or no relevance, sometimes are based not even on any sort of truth or fact. You know that saying that most of what you fear or most of what you worry about is never even going to come to fruition, right? But we spend time, do we not, still worrying about possibilities? So we spend our life force, our God force, our energy force working through things that may never happen. Have you ever done that? Pretty wild, right? Like, if he says this, then I will. If she does that, then I will. If this happens, then X, Y, Z. But nothing has even happened yet. So the invitation this week is to really pause and take a listen into that mind. To really dive into it as if you're the observer, as if you're the wolf. Think of the wolf as the watcher, and just dive into the watcher and see what's going on in there. What's going on in there? Because you may be surprised at what you find. And as scripture says, you may look and you may see and you may dive in there and you may be a little terrified by what you find. But after you understand what you find, you'll call it good. The true danger is not knowing what's in our minds and acting from all of these ideas, all of these conversations, all of these concepts in our heads. The voice in our minds and the many voices that we have in our minds can be thought of like little people. That's family systems therapy. It's the concept that these ideas, you could actually make like caricatures out of them, right? So I have my worry wart and I can name her whatever I want to name her. And every time an opportunity comes up, she steps in there and goes, well, what if people think this when you do it? What if people don't like it? What would your mother say? What would this? What would that? And there's nothing wrong with that conversation. There's nothing wrong per se with that voice. But if we don't understand that it is just a voice, then we can let it draw us off of our path and off of our intention and out of our true nature, which is pure light, which is pure being. And that being does not concern itself with these ideas of trivial judgment. But if we take those voices, which most of us do, and use those voices as our advisors, we can get into places where we don't want to be. We can feel stuck in life. We can feel limited. We can feel like there is something outside of me that is against me that I need to fix, manage, control, or change, rather than diving into the internal landscape and recognizing that it all starts here. Most of us use those voices in our heads as our AAA. When we need help, we call them forth. Give me some advice here. I want A, authority. Please run my life. Or you are running my life and I'm not even aware. We want A, an advisor. We count for guidance and direction. And we count sometimes on those thoughts, those voices, rather than diving into presence. Diving into direct consciousness, diving into a state of mindfulness and a state of prayer consciousness. And the last A is the auditor. The one that counts, makes inventory, casts judgments. So how is that working for us, calling AAA? We know that the problem is not a mechanical one. It's not a problem that can be fixed from the outside. And in fact, the moment we recognize that the problem is not a problem, we become free of it. I want to share a couple excerpts from the reading that we'll be diving into. On the chapter on your inner roommate, which your inner roommates are those conversations in our minds, it says this: when was the last time you had nothing bothering you? Before you had your current problem, there was a different problem. And if you're wise, you will realize that after this one's gone, there will be another one. The bottom line is you'll never be free of your problems until you are free from the part within that has so many problems. When a problem is disturbing you, don't ask, what should I do about it? Ask, what part of me is disturbed by this? If you ask, what should I do about it, you've already fallen into believing that there really is a problem outside that must be dealt with. If you want to achieve peace in the face of your problems, you must understand why you perceive a particular situation as a problem. See, awareness doesn't judge. Awareness simply presences. He goes on in another space to say, you don't have to think about the issues or analyze the issues. You can just be aware of it, the voice, the conversation, the issues brought up in the mind. He continues to say, eventually you will see that the real cause of problems is not life itself. It's the commotion that the mind makes about life that really causes the problems. It's the commotion in the mind that really causes the problems. Have you ever had that experience where you were standing somewhere in a moment and you had all these problems? And then something happened and it shifted your awareness, it shifted your consciousness in an instant, and all of a sudden everything that was a problem is no longer a problem because your energy is directed somewhere else, maybe usurped even by another problem, right? But all of a sudden everything that you thought was a big deal, not a big deal anymore. Something else has stood up in line to make it a big deal. Or there's been an epiphany, an experience of love, a revelation of wisdom, a revelation of source that freed us instantly from the conversation, from the problem. And in an instant, we awoke to recognizing that there is a power within us that shifts and transforms everything around us. Now, I'm going to give you a warning on this adventure that we're going to be going into for this 6 weeks. I'm not going to claim that it's easy. I was attempting to boil, I think, what might have been my first soft-boiled egg this last week. And my Grammy used to make me soft-boiled eggs, and my mom, and those are really the only people I've had make me soft-boiled eggs. But I like them, and I am very critical about them. I am very picky about them, and I have also, up till this week, I'm pretty sure never made one myself. But God forbid someone get a shell in my soft-boiled egg, or, and I shouldn't say someone, my Grammy isn't here anymore, but my mom, if she makes them. If there's a shell, I mean, the whining child, it's like I'm her 5-year-old again. Oh, ma! Like, how could you do that? Disgusting. I don't want it. Literally. And on the same is the white, if the white is all runny. Ugh. But if the yolk is solid, you can eat it. Do you get what I'm saying here? Like, no shells, no white runny, totally yellow runny. Now this is starting to sound like a gross egg story, but I'm very picky, I'm very critical about it, and I've never done it myself, right? So this week, I decided I'm making one, and I'm trying to find out from my mom, texting me her. She's told me before, but I'm like, exactly how do you make it? And it seems really simple. I mean, it seems like the easiest egg to cook. Take a pot of boiling water, put your egg inside of it, and then cook it for a little bit, and then take it out and chop it up or whatever, right? Who's made them before? Ridiculously not easy. Like, ridiculously not easy. So here I am, this pot of water. I couldn't get a hold of my mom, so I Googled it. It says 3 to 4 minutes. I'm thinking, oh, we could have an issue with the yolk and the yellow, the white, But I go ahead and I boil the water. I'm kind of remembering her saying some things about some tricks that she does. Like, does she run it under the water after, and does she start it in non-boiling water, or do you put it right into the boiling water? I'm not sure, but I'm just going to have to experiment. And it might take the whole carton of eggs to figure it out. But nonetheless, I boil the egg, and I think I've got it pretty right, and then I take it out, and I'm getting ready to crack it. And then all of a sudden I recognize, well, this is a very hot egg. And it's not cracking the way a normal egg would crack. It doesn't just crack on something and spill its beans, It's hot, and it's like stuck to itself. And I know the spoon, you've got to scoop it out, right? But it's hot, and so I'm thinking, how do people hold it? So I'm trying to hold it with something. So I'm trying to hold this egg with a rag, and I try to kind of crack it on the side of the counter to see, can I crack it open? So I crack it open, lots of little pieces all around it. Many possibilities for getting shells, right? Many possibilities for getting shells. But I crack it open, and there it is, kind of sitting in there, but getting it out without getting those shells is going to be difficult, because it's just, now I've got half an egg with just like a yolk looking at me, and then the other side, which did have some runny white in it, is just sitting there in the other half of the egg, but I couldn't even really peel it apart. Disaster. And I tried it again with the next one, well, maybe if I crack it with a spoon. I've seen people do that, right? So let me try on what someone else has done. Crack it with a spoon and then try to split it open. But I'm just wishing that this egg would crack the way a normal egg cracks before it's cooked. So anyway, I finally kind of figured it out. I run it under a little bit of cold water to get it a little cooler, and then I get it. But I am sitting there tediously pulling eggshells off and knowing that it's possible one's gotten in there. But I've tried really hard. I've done the best I can. And I finally scoop it out, and I get it into the bowl. And by this time, I don't even really want the egg anymore, right? But at least I feel good. At least I kind of know how to do it. If I were ever to want to do it again, at least I'm aware. Not only am I aware, but I am less critical of anyone else cooking a soft-boiled egg. I'm also aware that it's just part of the game, that if you make a soft-boiled egg, you might get some shell. Which I did. I got one, and it was horrible. Just horrible. I got a little crunchy thing. Calcium, I guess. But you might get a bit of shells in there, and regardless, it's an imperfect process, right? Until one, maybe, after showering their beloved cooking skills on their family or friends for their entire lifetime, may be masterful at making soft-boiled eggs. And in the midst of making those eggs, I realized there was a story there. This adventure in spirituality and this experience of mindfulness and becoming aware of what's going on in our heads and in our minds will be messier and more complicated than expected. It will involve tricks, tools, and techniques, and along the way we may burn our fingers and we may eat shells. And we may have more gratitude through the process. And we may expand our level of self-compassion and compassion for others. We may find ourselves trying to engage in the process, like myself with this egg, and find out that it's all just a big hot mess. And we may feel like a big hot mess. But at the end of it, we will know that if we choose, we can master the process. And that at least now we have an awareness of something that belongs to us that we didn't have before. Do you think it's possible that there are people in our lives that know more about the conversations in our head and the characters in our head than we know about our own? Do you think it's possible? Think of someone right now that you know that they might totally not be aware, but whenever X, Y, or Z comes up, they go, You remember Eeyore? Oh, no, here we go again. Now, just imagine that lack of awareness and imagine that we all have it, right? We all have it about our own minds and our own consciousness. So are we willing, even though the process might be messy, even though it might be uncomfortable, even though we might find things inside of that mind that feel like they're against us or feel like they might burn us, that this is a process of awakening to our awareness. And who better to do it for ourselves than us? Because that's the only place where change begins. So let us adventure into introducing the wolf, the watcher, into that environment. I want to close with a few very special quotes from Sir Abe Lincoln. And I wish I had the graphic, but if you could just imagine this. I found these quotes online, right? And there's a big picture of Abe Lincoln and then the quote right next to it, all right? So picture that. We're using our visualization skills today. Here's the first quote. The first quote goes like this. Abraham Lincoln said, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it." Anyone still waiting to get that? I'm usually slow with jokes, so I can help you out. Let us know that that reminds us to listen deeply and to question our thoughts. Not to take everything at face value, but to question our own thinking and to listen deeply. The second Abraham Lincoln thought is this: America will never be destroyed from the outside if we lose... Oh, wait. I'm just going to give you the real one. That was on the page, but this is the real one as it goes. At what point... No, that's not it either. Let's see if I have it. Oh, yeah, that is it. All right, you ready? The second piece was going to be that the second quote was not actually exactly an Abraham Lincoln quote either. It was like a rendition of what he said, right? So it's the rendition, and then here are the real words that he said. He says, "At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reaches us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction will be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher." So rather than talking about our America, can we bring that quote to home and read it again for ourselves? At what point, then, is the approach of danger in my life to be expected? If it ever reaches me, it must spring up within me. It cannot come from outside of me. If destruction be my lot, I must myself be its author and finisher. So that second tool is mindfulness, to look within. And the third Abraham Lincoln quote is this: "Towering genius disdains a beaten path. It seeks regions hitherto unexplored." Genius seeks regions unexplored. There is only one territory in the known physical universe that only you, only I have access to. And that territory is one that can transform our lives and transform the environment and the world as we know it. So are we ready to know thyself? And in that process, as we inquire, if we happen to feel like we discover an enemy, be quick to make friends. In the movie Ender's Game, the main character of the movie was on a battlefield, and he was learning how to do battle, and then as the movie progressed, he was actually doing battle. And he said this: "In the moment when I truly understand my enemy, understand him well enough to defeat him, then in that very moment, I also love him. I think it's impossible to really understand somebody, what they want, what they believe, and not love them the way they love themselves. And then in that very moment, when I love them, I destroy them." That illuminates the consciousness that there is no such thing as an enemy. There is no such thing as anything against me. When I inquire and use mindfulness, I enter into a consciousness of love, of compassion, and of non-duality. So let us take a deep breath and get ready for our adventure in spirituality. Namaste.